The night Tara walked into the Harcastle Foundation gala, her stepmother looked at her shoes and laughed. Not a quiet laugh, not the kind you hide behind your hand. It was the full kind, head back, champagne tilting dangerously in her glass, the kind that made the two women beside her turn to look, and then look at Tara, and then look away. "Those are the shoes you chose," her stepmother said. It wasn't a question. Tara looked down, black flats, scuffed at the left toe from where she'd caught it on the bus step. She'd polished them that morning. She'd thought they looked fine. "I didn't realize there was a dress code," Tara said. "There's always a dress code, sweetheart." Her stepmother reached out and touched the strap of Tara's dress, a dark navy thing she'd bought second-hand, ironed twice, which had seemed like enough. For some of us, it's just instinct. Her stepsister Claudine drifted over then, effortless in ivory silk, a man's hand already at the small of her back. She glanced at Tara the way you glance at furniture you've seen too many times to register. "You made it," Claudine said, and smiled in the direction of the man beside her. That was all. You made it like Tara had shown up to the wrong party and no one wanted to say so directly. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and moved toward the edge of the room. The Harcastle Gala happened every year at the top of the Meridian Hotel, 53rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. The whole city laid out below like something you could buy if you tried hard enough. Tara had been 3 times, always as her stepmother's obligation, always standing near the walls where the light didn't quite reach. Her stepmother's second husband, Tara's father, technically, though he'd made it clear years ago that the word carried little weight for him, had owed money to the kind of people who attended these events. He still did. That was why Tara was here. Not because anyone wanted her, because her stepmother needed her to smile and not embarrass the family, and make the numbers look right on the end-of-year report she'd been submitting for the past 4 years, without anyone realizing she was the one actually doing it. She found a spot near the east windows, and stood there with her water and watched the room. There was a man she didn't recognize standing near the bar. He wasn't doing anything. That was the strange part. Everyone else at these things was performing. The handshakes, the leaning in, the laughing too loud at things that weren't funny. This man was just standing, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding a glass he wasn't drinking from. He was watching the room the same way Tara was, except that nobody watched him the way they were watching her. They watched him and then looked away fast, the way you look away from something that might look back. He was older. Early 40s, maybe, dark hair going grey at the edges. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once, and was now something harder and more interesting than handsome. There was a scar that ran along his jaw, faint but there, the kind that takes years to fade and never quite makes it. She didn't know his name. She found out 20 minutes later, when her stepmother materialized beside her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I need you to not speak to Harwick tonight." Tara looked at her. "Who?" "The man by the bar. Don't look." Her stepmother's hand closed briefly around Tara's wrist. "Don't look at him. Don't approach him. And if he speaks to you, excuse yourself. Do you understand? Why would he speak to me?" "He wouldn't," her stepmother said, the words landing flat and certain. "But I'm telling you anyway." She drifted off toward Claudine's orbit, and Tara stood alone again, with the name sitting in her chest. Harwick. She didn't look at him. She looked at the city instead, at the lights going on and off in the buildings across the street, all those lit windows full of people who didn't know they were being watched. She thought about the spreadsheet she'd left open on her laptop, the one with the error in column G that had been making the quarterly numbers wrong for 6 months before she'd caught it. She thought about how tired she was. She thought about the bus ride home, and the hour it would take, and the cold. "You're doing the same thing I am." She turned. Harwick was standing beside her, not close. There was a full arm's length between them, but he'd moved quietly enough that she hadn't heard him coming, which shouldn't have been possible in a room this size. She said the first thing she thought of, which was, "I doubt that." He looked at her. His eyes were a dark greenish grey, the colour of Lake Ontario in October, and they were steady in a way that made her feel, briefly, that he was calculating something. Counting the exits, he said. She had been. It was a habit she'd developed in her father's house, where the exits had always mattered. She didn't say that. I was looking at the view, she said. You were looking at the windows across the street. He turned slightly to follow her gaze. Third floor, second from the left, someone's been pacing for about 10 minutes. She looked. He was right. Harwick, she said, because it seemed better to say it directly than to pretend she didn't know. That's what they call me here. He said it like it was mildly interesting information about someone else. And you? Tara, no last name? Not one that means anything in this room. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile. Not quite. A slight easing around the eyes, like a door opening half an inch. Fair enough, he said. She turned back to the window. She expected him to leave. That was what people did once they'd established that she was no one worth staying near. But he didn't leave. He stood beside her in silence for a moment, and then he said, quietly, Your stepmother is watching us. I know. She told you not to speak to me. Tara looked at him sideways. She told me not to approach you, and yet you came to me. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she wasn't expecting. He turned away from the view and toward the room, and he said, without looking at her, Who handles the Calloway accounts? She went very still. The Calloway accounts were her stepmother's. They were also, if you knew where to look, not entirely clean. Tara had known for 2 years. She'd been fixing the edges of the mess quietly, routing and rerouting, making it smaller, keeping it from becoming something that would blow back on her when the whole thing eventually collapsed. Because it would collapse, that had always been clear. She'd just been trying to make sure she wasn't standing too close when it happened. I don't know what you mean, she said. You do. He still wasn't looking at her. You've been correcting the ledger errors for approximately 14 months. You're careful. You almost hid it completely. He paused. Almost. The room felt very far away suddenly. The music, the clinking glasses, Claudine's laugh somewhere to the left. All of it receded. What do you want? Tara said. Someone who understands what a ledger is actually telling them. He picked up his glass and looked at it like he'd forgotten it was there. I have a problem. It's a numbers problem. I'm told you're good at numbers. By who? By the same people who told me you've been living in a 1-bedroom in Leslieville for 3 years, that you commute 40 minutes each way on the 501, and that you spent last Tuesday auditing a charity foundation's books pro bono because you didn't like the way their column totals were falling. The 501, that was the streetcar. He'd had someone find out which streetcar she took. I don't work for people I don't know, she said. Most people in this room work for me whether they know it or not. He set his glass down on the ledge beside him carefully, without looking away from the room. I'm offering you the choice to do it consciously. Better rate, better terms. And when the Calloway accounts finish collapsing, which they will within the next 8 months, with or without your corrections, you won't be anywhere near them. She should have walked away. She knew she should have walked away. She'd been walking away from things her whole life, from her father's house, from the schools she'd attended on half scholarships, and left before anyone noticed she was smarter than her professors, from the accounting firm that had let her go after. She'd flagged an irregularity that turned out to be the senior partner's irregularity. She was very good at recognizing when something was about to become dangerous and removing herself before the damage landed. But she'd also never had anyone lay out an offer like this. Clean, direct, with terms. I'd need to see the books first, she said. Of course, all of them. Not just what you want me to see. He looked at her then. The half-inch door opened a little further. Tuesday, he said, 7 o'clock. I'll send a car. He picked up his glass and walked back toward the bar, and Tara stood at the window for a long moment looking at the woman pacing behind the lit glass across the street, and she thought, I should tell him no. I should go home and close that spreadsheet and stop thinking about this entirely. She did not tell him no. The car arrived at 6:52 on Tuesday, which meant Harwick was the kind of person who factored in early. It was a black sedan, no markings, driven by a man who didn't ask her name and didn't make conversation, which she appreciated. She sat in the back and watched the city move past, and told herself this was just a consultation, an intake. She would look at the books, identify the problem, name her price, and either they would agree or they wouldn't. She told herself this the entire drive north, through the financial district, and up into a neighborhood of large, quiet houses set back from the street. The building Harwick used for his operations wasn't a house. It was a converted office, 4 stories of glass and dark brick, set behind a gate that the driver cleared without speaking. Inside, everything was clean and quiet in the way that expensive places are quiet, not empty, but controlled. The noise was somewhere else, through other doors. She was brought to a room on the 2nd floor, a conference table, a lamp, a laptop, 4 binders arranged in a precise row. She sat down and opened the first binder. The books were a disaster. Not chaotic, it was worse than chaotic. They were neat. That was the problem. Someone had made them look clean, had layered the misdirections so carefully that you'd have to know exactly what you were looking for to find where the real numbers were hiding. Tara had been doing this long enough that she could feel it before she could prove it. The slight wrongness of a ledger that's been composed rather than recorded. Like a sentence with too many adjectives. Technically correct. Missing something essential. She read for 3 hours. Harwick came in at 10 o'clock. He didn't knock. She heard the door and looked up, and he was standing there with his jacket off, his tie loosened, looking tired in a way that was different from the Gala, more real. He had a coffee in each hand. He set one beside her without being asked. "Well," he said, "there are 3 separate money streams that have been labeled as operational expenses for over 2 years. She turned one of the binders to face him, pointed to a column. "This one loops. It pays out to a holding company, which pays to another company, which routes back here under a different account number. Whoever set it up was good. But they got lazy around month 14. You can see it here, the decimal placement." He leaned over the table to look. He was close enough that she could smell the coffee on him, and something else. Wood smoke, maybe, or something close to it. "How much?" he said. "In this stream alone? 11 months of redirected cash. I'd need to calculate the exact figure, but the ballpark is significant. Someone inside who had access to the originating accounts and enough knowledge of the broader structure to hide it in operational noise." She leaned back. 3 candidates based on access level. I can narrow it to 1 if you give me the communication logs for those months. He straightened up. He was looking at her differently now, not the careful evaluation of the Gala, but something more direct. "You found this in 3 hours, he said. "I found the shape of it. The proof takes longer. How long? A week? Maybe 10 days if the communication logs are complete." He nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "The logs, remote access to the secondary accounts and—" She hesitated. "And I want the Callaway connection documented, in writing. The fact that I identified the problem and was attempting to correct it before any formal investigation. I want that on record before I do anything else." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're protecting yourself," he said. "I've always had to." Something crossed his face. Something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't the cold calculation she'd expected either. It was more like recognition, like a man who has spent a long time doing the same thing, seeing it in someone else and acknowledging it without needing to name it. "Done," he said. "I'll have the documentation drawn up tonight." She looked at him. "Just like that? The request is reasonable. I don't refuse reasonable requests." He picked up her coffee, the one he'd brought her, realized what he'd done, set it back down in front of her. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. "I'll have the logs pulled." He left before she could say anything else, and Tara sat alone in the room with the binders and the lamp and the coffee getting cold, and she thought, this is either the smartest thing I've ever done, or it's going to unravel everything. And she turned back to the binders because the numbers were the only part of this she knew how to trust. The week that followed was the strangest of her life. She came every day. The driver arrived at the same time. She was brought to the same room. The coffee appeared without being asked. She worked. She found the threads. She followed them through holding companies and numbered accounts and shell structures layered 3 deep, and slowly, precisely, she built the case. The man's name was Reyes, mid-level accounts manager, access to 2 of the 3 key streams, a new mortgage in his name in Oakville that his salary didn't account for. She laid it out in a document, clean and sourced. Everything linked to a primary record. She printed it at noon on the 9th day. Harwick read it at the table across from her. He read carefully, the way someone reads when they're not just absorbing information but testing it, turning each line over, checking for the edge. Tara watched him and drank her coffee and waited. When he finished, he didn't speak immediately. He set the document down on the table and looked at it. "This is thorough," she said. "It's complete," she said. "There's a difference." He looked up at her. "Thorough means you did your best," she said. "Complete means there are no gaps. This has no gaps." He considered that. "You're very confident for someone who walked in here 9 days ago not knowing anything about us." "I knew about the books," she said. "The books told me what I needed to know." "What did they tell you?" She thought about it. "That you're careful. That you built something that was supposed to be solid and someone got inside it anyway. That you're angry about it. Not because of the money. The money's significant, but it's not the point. The point is that someone thought they could do it. Thought they were smarter than whatever system you'd built." He was very still. "And that," she added, "that's the thing you actually can't stand." The silence stretched. Outside the window, somewhere below, a car door closed. "I'll transfer the remainder of your fee by end of day," he said. "The Callaway documentation is already on file, if it's ever needed. I know." She gathered the printed copies into a neat stack and slid them across to him. "I'm done here." She picked up her bag and stood up. "Tara." She stopped. He almost never used her name. It had been 9 days of last names and logistics and the odd direct question, and her name in his voice landed differently than she expected. She turned around. He was still at the table. He hadn't stood up. His hands were flat on the document, and he was looking at her with that grey-green gaze that didn't give away more than he chose to. "The work you did here," he said. "I've had people try to find this for 7 months. I know. You found it in 9 days. The decimal placement gave it away in the first 3 hours. The rest was just building the proof. You said that before." He tilted his head slightly. "You're very careful about the distinction between finding something and proving it." "The finding is useless without the proof," she said. "Anyone can guess. The proof is the whole point." Something in his expression shifted. Not the half-inch door this time. Something more like a window, briefly, in a house that doesn't usually have them. "There'll be other books," he said. "If you want them." She stood there for a moment, her bag over her shoulder, the room quiet around her, the city showing through the window in grey afternoon light. She thought about the bus, the 5:01, the 40 minutes each way through traffic and cold. She thought about the Callaway accounts, and the 8 months Harwick had given her before they collapsed, and the fact that the documentation was already filed, and the fact that he'd done it without hesitation, which meant he either kept his word or was very good at appearing to, and in her experience those things tended to be the same. She thought about the way he'd picked up her coffee by mistake, and set it back down without making it into anything. "I'd need to see each set of books before I agree to anything," she said. "And I set my own hours." "Understood. And I'm not on retainer. Each job is a separate agreement." "Also understood." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "I'll think about it." She turned and walked out, and she did not look back, and the elevator took her down to the lobby where the driver was already waiting without having been called, and she got in the back seat, and the city moved past the windows, and she thought, "I am either walking towards something or away from it," and she couldn't tell which, and that was either the most frightening thing about this situation or the most interesting thing, and she was not yet ready to decide which one it was. The driver didn't say anything. Tara watched the lights come on in the buildings as the afternoon went dark, all those windows full of other people's numbers, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt like the figure in her own column. Not a correction, not a rounding error, the whole point.